the Assad regime is no more. After a lightning offensive and in just 11 days, an alliance of rebel factions under the Military Operations Command, led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, swept away the old regime and have now set up a transitionary government in a free Damascus staffed by civilian members of the former Syrian Salvation government that once administered Idlib. But while Assad may be gone, that doesn't mean the war in Syria is over just yet. Let's look at the main players and strategic interests. First, there are internal fault lines that could trigger future confrontations. However, it seems the Syrians have long planned for this day and have preemptively cut a deal with the Southern Operations Command, a separate rebel group that emerged out of the city of Dar'a and the surrounding area, reconciled with the Assad regime, and then rebelled again as the Military Operations Command swept in from the north. While the full extent of the deal is unclear, it looks to revolve around the new power brokers in Damascus offering them seats at the table, and this looks positive for the transitional government's stability. Second, and of far greater concern to Syria's immediate south, is continuing Israeli aggression and encroachments into Syrian territory. However, this threat has been exaggerated and manipulated by clickbait grifters on social media due to sensitivities involving the righteous Palestinian struggle for self-determination and freedom. The reality is that Israel has barely moved beyond where it has been since its illegal annexation of the Golan Heights in 1967, on former Syrian dictator Hafez al-Assad's watch and his now disgraced and ousted son Bashar, who has fled to Russia. Let's not forget that, in half a century, the Assads did nothing against Israel's occupation of Syrian land, so it's really premature to expect the new Syrian government to do anything significant in its first week, especially after they have just emerged out of a brutal, grinding, near decade-and-a-half war against the Nusayri Ba'athist dictatorship. Israel's main threat to Syria, however, has been to destroy large segments of Syria's air defense systems to allow them greater freedom of movement over Syrian skies. But we all know that they were bombing Iranian targets in Syria at will anyway, so not much has changed in the short term there. Further, major Palestinian factions such as Hamas, who were formerly operating out of Assad-controlled Damascus, have consistently declared their support for the Syrian revolution in the past, and have now swiftly moved to warmly congratulate the successful overthrow of the Assad regime. This can only mean that Hamas expects support and strong ties with the new administration, and indicates that the organization feels that they will be able to work with Damascus's new rulers against a common Israeli threat. However, we will definitely have to keep watching developments to see how this ultimately pans out. Moving to the western Mediterranean coast, Russia has declared that it is very close to a deal with the former rebels to maintain its warm water port at Tartus and its airbase at Hmeimim. Syrian diplomatic staff in Moscow, formerly Assad regime officials, almost immediately raised the flag of the former rebels, declaring their full allegiance to Syria's new masters. Considering their close ties and regular meetings with Russian officials over the past 13 years, this is a strong indication that this was instigated at Moscow's behest in order to maintain their Syrian interests in a post-Assad world. This could also present an opportunity for the new Syrian government to create bilateral agreements with Russia, as despite Moscow's bloody involvement in war crimes, it is still a dangerous global power, and the Syrian government and the various factions in its orbit are simply not yet powerful enough to start a war with Putin, just as they are in no position to go to war with Israel. Moving to the north, the Syrians have further opportunities with Turkey. While Ankara supported the operation to overthrow Assad at a later stage and primarily throws its weight behind other Free Syrian Army units, now called the Syrian National Army, it has a vested interest in repatriating millions of Syrian refugees who have been hosted by Turkey since 2011. This is a popular demand by almost all Turkish political factions, as much of Turkey's economic problems were being blamed on Syrians due to inflammatory rhetoric from xenophobic populists like the Zafer Partisi's Umut Özdağ. However, this presents an opportunity for the new Syria, as it will mean an influx of human resources, many of whom will have been educated to university degree or higher, who will also have their own political, business and commercial links to Turkey, as well as Turkish contractors themselves and businessmen who will be ready to flood a new friendly market with goods, services and reconstruction bids. With a population decimated by Assadist, Russian and Iranian Shi'i aggression, this would mark a welcome change in Syrian fortunes. Moving to the east and southeast is a perennially thorny question, that of the restive Kurdish population and the armed factions there. With the United States as their main backers and President-elect Donald Trump already declaring that Syria was not America's problem and the US should have nothing to do with events there, it's perhaps getting clear to the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, that they need to find other allies should the US withdraw soon after Trump takes office next January. The SDF, closely intertwined with the Marxist PKK terrorist group, will instead be seeking more familiar bedfellows: Israel and Iran. This is where the two foreign powers have had close converging interests for decades, with several senior Israeli officials declaring support for an independent Kurdish state, and Iran having historically had close ties with the PKK to destabilize both Iraq and Turkey. Israel views the Kurds as a destabilizing force against Turkey and neighboring Arab countries, and exploits their legitimate historical grievances of political, ethnic, and cultural repression to gain an ally they can callously manipulate and sacrifice on the region's geopolitical chessboard whenever it suits them at very little cost to Tel Aviv. Iran has a similar outlook and engages in unspeakable repression of its own Kurdish population at home, while supporting secessionists in its neighbors to destabilize them, always attempting to drive wedges between Arabs and Kurds, in particular on ethnic grounds, despite their long-standing relations stemming from sharing bonds of religion and marriage for centuries. Indeed, Iranian involvement has already been extensively documented in Turkey's recent anti-PKK offensives in Iraq, with stockpiles of Iranian weaponry being found, including Iranian Fajr-1 missiles that could only have reached their arsenals with Iran's permission and acquiescence. Further, Iran's network of Shi'i terrorist proxies in Iraq have routinely attacked Turkey's Zilkan military base in Nainawa near Mosul, while the Iraqi government itself provides salaries to PKK-aligned groups who nominally fight under the banner of the Popular Mobilization Forces, an Iraqi paramilitary organization that is largely staffed by Shi'i militants with close ties to Iran and directly funded by Baghdad's defense budget. These same Tehran-aligned Iraqi Shi'i factions have, as recently as on the 6th of December, indicated that they will likely arm PKK groups in Syria and in Turkey with drones if Ankara continues its support for the now new rulers of Syria. With this nexus of Iran-sponsored Iraqi state and non-state actors actively arming, funding and supporting the Kurdish Marxists, Iraq now sits at the heart of a hub of Iranian efforts to use the PKK to destabilize Syria now that Tehran has lost Assad. The same smuggling routes for weapons and narcotics that Iran has historically used in PKK-held territories in both Iraq and Syria will provide a steady flow of cash, drugs and weapons that will flow from Iran through to Iraq and into Syria, all in the name of ensuring Syria's revolution is unsuccessful or greatly weakened by having to constantly fend off SDF aggression in what would be a bloody war of attrition, a strategy Iran has used to great effect in the past in Iraq. That said, the new authorities in Syria have already tried to counter this by striking a conciliatory tone, promising Kurds an inclusive stake in a unitary Syria, causing cautious optimism among the Kurdish population. How this eventually takes shape in terms of Kurdish representation in government or limited autonomy is unclear. But what is clear is that Iran will not rest until it takes vengeance against the Syrians for daring to demand freedom and dignity, and for hurling out its ally Bashar al-Assad to live out the rest of his days in humiliation in the Russian cold.